Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another fantastic Yankee Air Museum Historic Presentation Night. I'm Jeff Bush, your host for this evening and most other evenings as well. How many first-timers tonight? Ooh, good. How many non-members? Okay. Did you know that these events are free to members? It's just one of many benefits you get from becoming a member of the museum, and it's $65 for an annual membership for an individual. Not a bad deal. As always, for the members, we do ask for donations on your way out to help offset the expenses of putting these programs on. We have donation boxes, one here, one in the hallway. Drop $5 in there, and that'll go a long way to keep these programs coming every month. Some upcoming events we've got. May 7th, our 5th annual Bombers, Berries, and Brews. That'll be over in Hangar 1. It's a fun night. We get together, bring in a number of breweries, wineries. This year we're going to add distilleries so that you can sample some of their product. And it's a good fundraiser for the program, the museum as well. June 8th, Wild Wednesday, will feature the Canadian CF-18 demonstration team, and we're going to have flyovers by the Canadian C-130 Hercules and the CP-140 Aurora aircraft. Who knows what a CP-140 Aurora is? Besides you. CP-140 is the Canadian version of the P-3 Orion. Little different configuration here and there, but they're going to do a flyover at Wild Wednesday. That's going to be June 8th. Tickets are on sale on the website. Just go to yankeeairmuseum.org/events, and you can pick up tickets there. And then June 12th, the next weekend, we're going to have our fourth annual Wings and Wheels will be here. And we're going to try and do that at our new Aeronautics Center, the new hangar, which is on this side of the field for a change. Now, this time, I'd like to ask that you turn all your cell phones either to stun or off. And hold all your questions until the end of the presentation. There will be a Q&A session at the end. This month, they're subject to something that I suspect few folks know about. During World War II, the Japanese Army launched over 9,300 balloons personnel and incendiary bombs. 2 of these actually made it to Michigan. Our speaker tonight is a retired librarian, history librarian from Michigan State University. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Michael Unsworth.
Wet my whistle. Okay, well, I'll just get straight to the chase. Why did Japan send 9,300 unmanned balloons to North America? One word: revenge. And it was for the Doolittle raid, which I think some of you might have heard, took place in April 18, 1942. The American enemy had struck the Japanese home islands. The High Command was ashamed. The Japanese homeland was sacred. The Emperor's homeland was attacked. And therefore, the American mainland had to be put under attack in retaliation for that. Now, the Japanese didn't have any conventional means to do that, and I'll get into that in a minute. They didn't have any bases and no long-range bombers. And there was a movie out a couple of years ago about the Battle of Midway, which was better than the 1970 movie about the Battle of Midway, in my opinion. Who else thinks so? Yep. That really put a stop on the Japanese options in attacking America. If they had been successful, they would have gone on to, hopefully for Japanese, to take Hawaii. So the Japanese had to resort to unusual means. Now, before I talk about the unusual means, I'm quickly going to do brief history and strategy. Why was there a Pacific War? Japan has only a few things in abundance. People and land is not good for much of anything else. They lack a lot of agricultural land. They don't have a lot of natural resources. So they were taking over Manchuria. The Chinese didn't like that. There was a war going on. We didn't like that. And so the Americans put an oil embargo on the Japanese. So the Japanese thought, okay, we want the oil down in Indonesia. Oh yeah, the Brits also have rubber plants in Malaya. Okay, that'd be great. We can take those and head with the U.S. But between Japan and the, Southeast Asia is the American colony of the Philippines. The Japanese, we don't want to have the Americans and the Philippines cut our supply line. Thus, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor to put our fleet out of it, and they were successful. And then they took a bunch of islands and had this barrier line right here. Their strategy was, we're going to wait for the Americans to come, and they're going to impale themselves on our great defenses. So they did not have any long-range bombers that could hit the U.S. They could not avenge the Doolittle raid. So what did they think of doing? They had huge submarines that could carry float planes. In fact, one attacked the Pacific Northwest, I think, in 1942. And a couple of the submarines were the biggest subs until we started making our nuclear subs, missile subs. Sub would surface, assemble the airplane, and fly off. But the Japanese Army goes, hey, Navy guys, we don't want you to use those for anything except supplying our island garrisons. So that was out. Okay, like every advanced nation, Japan had scientific research activities. This was a military one. Oops, go back. And I think it was the home island, Honshu, a place called Noborito. These guys found out that balloons could be used to attack the U.S. So they were going to use what they called the hugo balloons. Okay, what does hugo mean? Okay, fu is the 32nd character in the Japanese syllabulary. Okay, go means number. Hugo means it was weapon number 32 of the Japanese Military Scientific Laboratory, and fu just happens to be the first syllable of their word for balloon, fusen. So it's kind of a play on word. So they call these fugos, and you'll see that in a lot of books that have been written. Okay, how are they going to do it? The Japanese researchers in the 20s and the 30s, they had discovered the jet stream, which we see now in the weather reports every day. The jet stream's doing this, the jet stream's doing that. Well, what is the jet stream? It's a river of air, and the Pacific at any rate goes from west to east and travels at 120 miles an hour. And it's about 30,000 feet. That's where a jetliner today usually flies. And the Japanese thought, if we can get a balloon up in this area between 30 and 40,000 feet, after these are nighttime, these dark lines. After about 60 hours, we can drop bombs over the mainland of the U.S. All right, now we talk physics lesson. Okay, when a balloon is up at altitude, and if it's sealed like these balloons were, yeah, I'll get to that in a minute. If nothing is done, the sun is going to heat the gas and it's going to explode. So that's one problem. And the other problem is at nighttime, it cools off. And if nothing happens, okay, the lift is going to decline, and if nothing happens, it's going to hit the ocean. So how are they going to fix these two problems? Well, they came up with a paper balloon. It was about 30 feet across. That's the size of a hot air balloon. But it is not a hot air balloon. Okay, I don't know if you noticed on my tie, I have a Montgolfier hot air balloon from the 1780s. They literally had a fire to provide the lift. And the current hot air balloons, they have a nice little, any hot air balloon is here? Go ahead, you say. Oh, yeah. Okay, it's a propane torch, right? Yeah. So, you know, if you see a hot air balloon going over your place, sometimes you're up. That's the propane building, and that keeps it up. So, how did the Japanese solve their problems with this thing? Is here you have a gas release valve, and the gas is hydrogen. Okay? If the envelope gets too full, you'll see in a minute, a little device automatically vents it. So that takes care of the daytime problem. The nighttime is a little more difficult, because you have to drop sandbags to keep it up at the correct height. This is a balloon that landed in Michigan. Toward the end, we'll talk about that. But this is the gas release valve right here. You can see the gasket will press down on the valve and it'll vent the gas. Now, the chandelier is a lot more complicated. It's kind of Rube Goldberg. And this is a cutaway diagram. The Canadians called this the chandelier, which I think sounds more elegant than John. But anyway, the key thing is you have a box and clear bakelite. Who remembers bakelite? All right, can anybody tell the unknowing what bakelite is? It's an early form of plastic. Okay, and I think it was kind of brittle. Right. So in this clear bakelite, you have a battery, and it is surrounded by salt water as an antifreeze. And right below it is a box that contains some barometers, and that's the second key element. Barometer will indicate how high the balloon is going. And if it goes below 30,000 feet, it flips the switch that goes on some wires, what they call blowout plugs. Those are essentially shotgun shells. And it'll shoot out a blowout plug, and one sandbag will drop. And then another sandbag will drop. And theoretically, the balloon should go back up to 30,000 feet. If it doesn't, this thing goes through the whole process again. So it's kind of clever. But as you will see, it looks pretty ridiculous. It looks like a spaghetti weapon. But down here are some important payloads for the balloon. By the way, these are U.S. naval aviators. Back during the war, they wore kind of a gray greenish outfit to show that they weren't like the other sports who wore dark blue. And it is still a legal uniform for naval aviators, but unlike Tom Cruise, who can afford everything, most naval aviators don't want to buy another set of uniforms. So anyway, but down here we have a sandbag, we have a bomb, which is high explosive, 33 pounds, and then right here is a cylinder, that's the incendiary bomb. And here is a little better shot of These are all the cords that go out to those blowout plugs. The total ballast, the sandbags of the bomb, was about 155 pounds. That was the useful payload of the balloon. We did capture balloons. Go into that a little more. But here is a complete chandelier. We put it in a high altitude chamber, and it shows a sandbag dropping on that. It was a pretty incredible piece of engineering. Now, I'll just quickly muddy the waters and talk about the laws of war. The bombing that took place from airplanes in World War II, those were legal because those were aimed. These were not aimed. So theoretically they were illegal, but after the end of the war we didn't try anybody for it. There's another reason for that. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, is that in 1995, the New York Times had a front page article that, as you can see, has a picture of a hugo balloon. And this chap here, Nicholas Kristoff, he was in the news a couple months ago. He tried to be put on the ballot to be governor of Montana, but the Montana people said, no, you're a New Yorker, you haven't lived here. But anyway, he's a good author. People in Japan have found old documents that former soldiers and leaders had squirreled away after the end of the war, and they ended up literally in flea markets. And some of these documents said he really wanted to use chemical and biological weapons against that. So here's a quote. Kristoff says it's becoming evident Japanese officers propose using balloon bombs to carry disease to America. There was a fierce debate in Tokyo. General Hideki Tojo vetoed the proposal. He knew that by then Japan was likely to lose the war, and he felt that biological assaults on the United States would invite retaliation with German or chemical weapons being developed by America. Tojo was right. The Japanese were defending islands. And some could make the case that, hey, the Americans should have done it because the Japanese used biological weapons against the Chinese, our allies. So you can think about that. Okay. Why did they come to make these balloons out of paper? Well, this was a crash program. It started in 1942. The researchers were told you cannot use strategic materials. Because, as I said, Japan does not have a lot of natural resources. And I think most of you will know that Japan is renowned for its paper making. And the researchers had a big breakthrough. They developed a special laminated mulberry paper that, when shellacked with a persimmon juice sealant, could withstand the rigors of a high altitude crossing. Okay, laminate. All right. Okay, I have one sheet of paper, right? Hey, I can tear it pretty easily. Do two. It's a little more easy. Harder. If I get 3 or 4. It's a little bit harder. These are glued together. That's what a laminate is. Engineers in the audience, did I explain it right? Thank you. Okay. You can see most of the people in this paper making operation are female. There is one soldier there. The paper making was subcontracted to small businesses. And then they came up with all these sheets of paper. How are you going to make a balloon out of that? Well, Japanese were a little bit sexist. Who has the most nimble hands? Not a bunch of clunky guys, but young high school girls. These poor kids had to do this as part of their compulsory war work. Okay, in the U.S., you hear about the recycling drives and all that kind of stuff. No, this was not voluntarily. They had to do it. The buildings were tighter than because you didn't want a breeze coming in and blowing the paper all around. Notice the ladies have to wear sweatbands, and they had to paste these together. The paste was a compound of arum root, which some of you may know is used in cooking. It's edible. In fact, if you're making cheesecake, arum root will really solidify. It won't be drippy. These kids were on such tight ration, they tried pilfering the paste to take home to their families so they could eat it. Okay. All right. The balloons were pasted together. They did test inflations in sumo wrestling halls, movie theaters, gyms, any place, because these things, 30 feet across. They used fans to inflate them, and they had to check them for any flaws, and then they had to make repairs. Anybody know Japanese? Can I? Okay. All right. One translator said, balloon bomb photographed the youth of the maidens. Okay. My translator was good. Okay. Now, this was done under tight secrecy. The people working on it really didn't know why they were doing it. And there were rumors always have, but people really didn't think that this would be used as a weapon. Other rumors were more credible. Okay. Now, once they're constructed, they're tested. This is from an earlier balloon. During the test, it's a little smaller. This guy in the dark uniform, he is a naval officer. I think these guys are Army. It's hard to tell. But the Navy and the Army in Japan, like most armies and navies, never get along with each other. And the Navy had its balloon, which was technically superior, but it was made out of rubber. Rubber was in tight supply. So the high command said, okay, squids, you got to work with the dog faces. You got to work as a team as much as you hate each other on that. So that's a test. And by the summer of '44, they had made enough balloons, 10,000 balloons. Okay, this is from a Smithsonian history, which you can get on Amazon. As a matter of fact, I have some sheets of bibliography, more sources. And if you run out, give Becca your name, and she can send it to you as an attachment. Okay, they were launched from the main island of Honshu on their east coast. Could launch them every day. They had to launch when the winds were calm. It's usually in the morning or in the evening. Let's explain the actual launch side. These are hydrogen tanks. The beauty of the Japanese balloon is when it got over the U.S. after 60 hours of crossing, drop of the bombs. Not all at once, but from 30,000 feet. Now, you look at a jet and there's no contrails, you can't see it. And after that, a bomb is tripped off to destroy the chandelier, and then a little later, a bomb here on the side of the envelope, and that explodes. And so you'll see a big flash in the sky because this thing is made out of hydrogen. And we all remember what happened in the Hindenburg zone. Okay? And what they did, they had these, I call it a cradle, but they tamped down the balloons. They filled these little tanks up to fill the balloons up. They did not fully inflate them because, remember, when it's up in the sky and the sun is bearing down, it's going to heat it. So they, and then they let it go. They knocked off the, I forget what they call it, the stakes. And this was, the Japanese had a special balloon unit already. And the guys doing this, remember this as being really beautiful because, okay, it's the sunrise or sunset. These things are silent. They kind of look like giant jellyfish books, and they're silent. They will just go up. And okay, there were reports of casualties. So the electricity wasn't right, static electricity, that kind of stuff. And it could be is that maybe more Japanese soldiers died from the balloons than what died in the U.S., but we don't know. I'll get into that a little later on that. Okay. This is one of the few photos of a balloon airborne. And as I said, it took about 60 hours to go across the Pacific. And they launched from November 44 to April 45, 9,300 balloons. And they estimated that 1,000 would get across. That's about 10%. And they thought if only one balloon creates a forest fire that's really bad, like the one that hit Tillamook, Oregon in 32, that would be enough. Gee, what if they were launching them today? There'd be more fires probably. Or if Americans or Canadians were killed, then the whole effort is worthwhile. The attack by Doolittle would be avenged. The Japanese assumed that the American news organizations wouldn't ignore this at all. It's an important story. And Americans, in their view, is that they're gossips. They're undisciplined. They're sure to be talking about this. And they would get feedback on where the balloons were going, and maybe we should send some from other locations, who knows. But little news filtered back to the Japanese. There were only 2 stories in the American press in December of 44 of the first incidents in Montana and Wyoming. By mid-April of 45, the Japanese gave up. They were getting no feedback. The homeland was getting bombed by the B-29s. They were just, the hydrogen production facilities were being destroyed, so they just gave up. But we didn't know that. That's, that's the thing about, wartime, fog of war. You don't know what's happening on either side. Okay. 285 balloons were discovered during the war. Remember I said the Japanese thought they'd have a 10% success rate? Well, what happened to the other 650? Okay, the problem, which the Japanese didn't know about, was this Bakelite box that had the salt water. The salt water was not strong enough. The bombs, the battery froze. So if the battery doesn't operate when it's frozen. So you don't have the sandbags being dropped. Okay. Here's one of the balloons that is discovered in the Pacific. And again, doesn't that look like a jellyfish? And does that look like a paper? Now, one real interesting thing, one of the investigators who worked on this, he kept a piece of paper in the balloons. He had these barbets. He said, "You think you're a big tough guy? I bet you can't tear this apart. Look, I'll make it easy for you. I'll dip it in some beer, make it wet." It got stronger when it was wet. You know, it's that persimmon juice sealant. You know, the little umbrellas you get at the tiki bars. It's the same principle. Here is the numbers that were discovered during the war. After VJ Day, the American authorities quit counting. Hey, we went to war, what should we? And if you would superimpose a map of population density in the U.S., it would pretty much, and Canada, would pretty much cover that. So I'm pretty sure there's more balloons out there in the western states. But if you've ever been hiking, you know, even in Michigan, it's tough finding stuff like that. Like, you know, one example I always like to point out is that in California, a fighter plane took off and crashed less than a mile from his airfield. They didn't discover the plane until the 80s. I mean, it's really tough out there. Okay. Balloons were recovered, 2 in Mexico. That was the southernmost. As north as the Yukon and Alaska. And as far east as good old Great Lakes State, Michigan. Now, one of my frustrations is every time I get a Michigan news outlet covering this, I said, please include this picture because I want to know who this guy is. But they never do. Anybody know who he is? Okay. What are the Americans and Canadians going to do about this? Okay, let's be bureaucrats. We got together with our friends the Canadians. Any Canadians here? Good, I can say Jose. I mean, no. Canada and the U.S. had full control of their own authorities, territories, and full information sharing. And in the U.S., the military portion, the Navy, anything over the water, the Army over land, and J. Edgar Hoover gets involved because he thinks that saboteurs might be on some of these balloons. Of course, he didn't know how big the balloons were at this time. But yeah, you had FBI guys along with the Army intelligence. And the Army intelligence guys were by and large civilian agents. Okay, one of the main countermeasures in terms of expense, was trying to pick these up by radar, but those balloons did not have a lot of metal in them. And another problem was that we started putting these stations on the Olympic Peninsula in spring of '45, right when the Japanese quit sending them. So the poor radar guys, who were Army, stayed at these remote locations looking for Japanese balloons that never came. Okay, it was called the Sunset Project. And then we had some interceptions. This one took place early on in February '45. Here's the Canada-U.S. boundary. Anybody ID this plane? Yeah, Kitty Hawk, because it was flown. The Canadians didn't put maple leaves on their planes until after the war. So this is not a British plane, it's a Canadian plane. And they were very hard to shoot down because they were going slow. And, you know, the fighter pilots are trained to shoot at something fast. And some balloons were intercepted over the Aleutians in Alaska with some gun camera film on that. Not terribly good. I preferred the nice color thing. This was on a officer's mess of the Canadian Navy base. Okay, my favorite interception was done by a Canso flying boat, which is the Canadian version of the Catalina. And this was in Cole Harbor on Vancouver Island in March of 45. Close to their base, the crew discovered a balloon, and it was around sunset, so they had to use flares. But the pilot would fly close to the balloon, have the prop wash, get the balloon close to shore, and it finally landed close to the airbase. And of course, this is right at sunset. The next day, what did they have? Well, this is Canada. They had a big blizzard. So it took them like 3 days to go and retrieve the balloon on that. The most effective countermeasure was just trying to figure out what the heck these things were. This is one of the first balloons that was recovered. Well, no, not really. It was December. But this is Newcastle, Wyoming. This is some kind of gym. And unfortunately, this scanned image isn't as good as I'd like it to be, but they're party decorations up in the gym. But here we have about four Army guys showing how big the balloon is. 5, yep, there we go. And here's one in the aptly named Canadian area of the Northwest Territories called Snowdrift. This is a balloon that apparently had landed much earlier when they found it. And here's one at Glacier Park. And when I gave a talk at Glacier a few years back, I did go to their archives and go through the reports. And also I went to the Montana Historical Society. And in the official reports, the Park Service people said, we discovered it. But the Park Service guys were supervising conscientious objectors who were working on parks projects. And in their oral histories, they said, we discovered it on that. And then here's a discovery of a balloon that was just lucky that the balloon in Canada landed in a lake. Well, one part did, and then one part landed on the shore. But prior to ice road truckers, the Canadians had trains of cars that were towed by tractors, and they went on the frozen lakes. And it just happened that one of these balloons landed along the route. If it landed in another lake, nobody would have known it, and then when it warmed up, it would have sunk. Okay, once you've retrieved a balloon, we do technical analysis. The Army and Air and Navy, they did a bunch. They farmed out stuff to universities and research establishments. This was a report that I think Cornell made. One of the important findings was when they found intact sandbags. And they sent the sandbags to the U.S. Geological Survey. And this is what scholars do. In the pre-war period, geologists would meet and, hey, here's some American sand. And their Japanese colleagues would go, oh, here's some Japanese sand. And so they tested the sand and they found out that the sand came from specific beaches on the main island of Honshu. And there was even some kernels of rice that they were able to germinate and it sprang up, and it was Japanese variety rice. So That's how we firmly discovered they came from Japan. The Japanese were really careful to avoid any identifying marks. Okay, now we're discovering these balloons. We're discovering them December, January, February, March. And why in God's name do they have these incendiaries on them? That's not a good time to send. Incendiaries to set forest fires. But we investigated them, and they thought that they would be effective, especially if they kept launching them in the springtime and in the summer, because they weren't forest fires. They were all in uniform, fighters, most of them. And what little logging was done, they didn't clean up after them, so there was a lot of debris on the forest floor. And the precipitation in the threatened areas was substantially below normal. So, yep, this is the incendiary, diagram of it, and this is one of the incendiaries that exploded. I covered this. Okay, also, they didn't discover these on the balloons, but during the Pacific War, Americans and British discovered cardboard squares that they called incendiary leads that might be used. So, the Americans had something called the Firefly project, and it was a combined effort of American paratroops and the Army Air Forces. The Air Forces sent basically the Grasshopper pilots, the Piper Cubs, to do reconnaissance to, if a fire had been sent. And the Army did send a parachute unit. It's the C-47. I think we got any parachutists here? Any smoke jumpers? Good, I can see whatever I want. I mean, okay. The difference between a military parachutist and a smoke jumper is very different. A military parachutist is coming down really quick because people are shooting at him. A smoke jumper, on the other hand, he wants to come down pretty darn slow because he wants to maneuver his parachute so he does not land into fire. Okay, who did we send? We sent the soldiers of the 555th Parachute Infantry Battalion, an all-black unit. Despite all the casualties that the Airborne had during the war, they did not want to send this one unit. And so the Army said, okay, you can use these guys. And they fought fires, but there was no damage caused by the wounds. We're launching them in early April, so summertime. There were a lot of fires, but none balloon caused. Okay. Biological warfare threat. Again, we don't have the full information. That's why we're investigating this stuff. So we are discovering the balloons that have these Bakelite boxes with the battery, but that has water in them. And they think that that might be used to put in biological or chemical agents. And these are the types of wonderful things that we thought that could be sent. That's for the humans, and then for the animals. And as I said, the high command, Tojo, said, no, we're not going to use this stuff. But we did have a network set up to monitor any unusual diseases about that. And the Army had 12 men units scattered across the West to to decontaminate any areas. And they had to carry all their gear with them because roads generally didn't go where a balloon landed. And they had to suit up, and they would have used bleach to decontaminate. Initially, these units had a doctor in it, a physician, and after a while, if they're not finding anything, and the physicians are going, do we really have to do this? I don't want to hike all over the place. But there's no evidence that there were any chemical agents used. Okay. Now we're getting to denial of information to the Japanese. Okay, in December of 19, there is concern that Japanese saboteurs might be found in these balloons. They had found 2. And then on January 2nd, Mr. Hoover said, well, this might be sabotage. There was a press briefing with J. Edgar Hoover. And when I asked the FBI, gee, can I have the text of the press briefing? And they said no. Nice guys. Your tax dollars at work. Okay. So now let's get to actual censorship. 2 days after Hoover spoke, the Office of Censorship requested the media not to publicize the Fugo incidents. The Canadian government does the same thing. And to this day, media historians and media people said, look, we kept a secret. Okay. Yes, this was a voluntary effort by the media. But remember, newsprint was in short supply during the war. In fact, publications vied with each other on how crummy the paper they used was. So if a newspaper violated the censorship request, they wouldn't get any paper to publish. And radio, there wasn't TV, it was mass. Radio has public airwaves. They could take that license away really quick. In fact, the balloon that landed in Fort Collins, Colorado, that's how I got into this. The newspaper account said a guy was starting to do a remote broadcast when it was cut off. Because the balloon went right over the town of Fort Collins and then dropped a bomb on its farm. People saw the bomb drop. And the censorship was so aggressive, okay, it was aggressively enforced. And a balloon appeared in us. People remember Smiling Jack? Okay. It appeared, and the syndicate caught hell for it from the Office of Censorship. But, okay, the security unraveled in May 45 in outside of Bly, Oregon. Here's Portland, there's Eugene. It's in the dry part of Oregon. Medford was like the closest place. Mrs. Elsie Mitchell and 5 kids on a church picnic were killed by a balloon. And these were the only photos I could really use in this. The rest of them were pretty gruesome. The locals were really mad, and rightly so. But the only people who knew about this were law enforcement and then government people like Forest Service. They're going, how come we weren't told? And it still had an impact on this community to this day. So finally, there's a release of information to the public in May of 22nd, 45. Before that, they had basically a case study of how not to reveal information. Since kids were killed, they said, okay, we'll tell school kids and Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts not to touch anything in the woods. So what do you think the kids do when they get home? Mom and Dad, what's this stuff in the woods? So eventually they did release information. little crisis science monitor. First time the general public had been told. And so right after that, suddenly there are all these balloon sightings. I gave a talk in Nebraska one time, and afterward the guy came up and said, yeah, one guy said in my town that he saw a balloon and he shot at it at night. And then the next day they discovered that the town water tower had buckshot. And there was a boat in the Sioux Locks. Oh, look, there's a Japanese balloon. They poured it on. It turned out to be the planet Venus. And there were weather balloons that were sent up all the time. So, when people will start looking for that stuff, maybe they'll actually find it. The most embarrassing thing for censorship took place in Canada. The Toronto Censor let this headline in the late edition come out about chemical weapons and incendiaries. And they yanked that copy off the stands pretty quick. But it was cleared by a censor. All right. And it was the most effective countermeasure because, as I said earlier, the Japanese were getting no feedback whatsoever about this, so they gave up about it. And here's the biggest irony. Anybody heard of Hanford, Washington? Sir, you're shaking your head. What's there? Oh. In 45, it was not just research, it was making plutonium. And on March 10, one of these balloons didn't hit Hanford itself. It hit the high tension line, electric line, running between the Grand Coulee Dam and the Bonneville power stations, and created an electrical surge in Hanford. And the reactor's automatic safety devices shut the reactor down. And I really don't know if the balloon's bombs went off when it hit the power lines on this, but the guys working on this said they never tested the safety procedure because they just didn't want to risk it. It actually worked on that, but the Japanese almost stopped the bomb. Okay. All right. Now, a little summary here. 285 discovered to basically VJ Day. I think it was like August 22nd, 21st. 285. In the U.S., 2 were in Michigan. Okay, now it's local history time. 1 landed on the Kent-Allegan County line, and the other landed in the Detroit suburbs, Farmington to be specific. Okay, let's talk about what happened at North Door, Byron Center. These 2 towns or areas were named. Like I said, it was right on the Kent-Allegan line. And on a February day, property of Chris Stein, nice good farmland. Though, okay, I'm from Indiana originally. I can't see why the West Michigan people call their country roads streets and avenues. Anybody know that? I mean, why? But those are for urban areas. I don't know. Okay. Well, thank you for telling me about this. Okay. In that field are 3 boys, Buzz and the 2 Fine brothers. And they see this balloon coming at them, going down, and it lands on Chris Stein's yard. And they're just overjoyed. It's just the envelope. There's no chandelier. And they kind of get it together. And they ask a neighbor who had a pickup truck, let's take it home. And they put it in, and they take it home. And this is what they recovered. They recovered the envelope, a lot of rope, and the kids were thrilled about the rope because it was in tight supply during the war. There were these, burnt ropes and some metal things, and then there was the gasket, the blowout gasket. And then, so another part of that. So they took it to the Fine family farm, which was close by. And Mrs. Fine, Marguerite, that's her wedding picture, but she was entertaining the local priest. And the kid comes in and goes, look at this great thing we discovered. Oh, we can't keep it, and keep it. And then the pastor goes, now boys, I think this is a government weather balloon. We'll tell the sheriff. Well, the pastor told the Kent County sheriff, even though the Fines lived in Allegan County. Now, when I gave my first Michigan talk at a Michigan Historical Society meeting, I said I thought that was kind of strange. And there's two guys in the audience. They go, we're from Allegan County. We call the Kent County sheriff all the time still. So let's see here. Okay. A couple days later, Army and FBI guys come to the farmhouse. They collect the envelope and the other items and says, don't talk about this. And the kids are heartbroken. They wanted this thing, it was theirs. But they go, no, can't say anything. And, back in '85 when I came there with the reports from the government, the family was pretty surprised. Okay. In 1947, a guy named Don Picard, he got his military balloonist license in Minneapolis. He was in the Army ROTC at the University of Minnesota. And the balloon he used was a trophy he got when he was in the Navy in World War II at the Naval Air Technical Center of Lakehurst, New Jersey. That ring any bells for anybody? Where the Hindenburg crashed. That's where the Navy had its ballooning activities because the Navy had limbs. And at the end of the war, the guy, Picard was just like a seaman apprentice. The superiors said, you want one of these, your family's into ballooning anyway. And he goes, sure. So he takes the one that landed in West Michigan. Now in his article in Smithsonian Air and Space, he said the balloon came from Flint. So I finally talked to him and he said, I guess I was confused, but there are only two Michigan ones and one not Flint. And I really did not want to go through the Naval Air Technical Center to see if there was actually one. But, and, there it is. He kept it. There's a hugo, so, yep, there it is. And then in 2017, WZZM, and the bibliography, there's the website for the TV deal on it. But there's Buzz talking about the balloon that he found when he was a kid. And because of that, Teresa Kyle of the local History Society got in touch with Don Picard. And her society bought the balloon and they have plans to show it. So keep watching your newspapers for that. It's in the newspapers in a few years. Okay, the second one, this looks kind of crazy, March 25th, June 8th. But this took place in the Detroit suburbs. This is a more recent map, but it was just a little bit north of 8 Mile Road in Farmington on Hill Road. Okay, here's what happened. In March, the owner of the house, let's see, do I have his name? I don't think he lives there anymore. Yeah, John T. Cook. He looks out his window at vacant yard next to his place, and he sees this fire. Oh, that's strange. Fire doesn't go anyplace. It's March. Back then, the winters were stronger. Doesn't think anything about it. And then in the spring, he starts a garden in that area and finds a strange looking tin can. He puts it to the side. And then when the release of information about the Japanese balloons took place in late May, he goes back and he discovers that that's not a tin can. Now, one of his neighbors was a state police sergeant. And he gives it to the sergeant, who takes it into work, and a couple days later, some military intelligence guys go, this is incendiary canister from the Japanese balloon. Don't talk about it. Now, Michigan was not prepared for this. West of the Mississippi, the local state governments were told about this. Michigan didn't know anything about it. They had meetings, and the main point of contention in one of the meetings was that, okay, if a balloon gets shot down, who's going to take liability for anything? And at one point, the Army Air Corps representative goes, damn it, we'll do it. I want to get out of here. So that was the, and to me, this is a case of the balloon performing exactly as designed. All somebody saw was a fire. If Mr. Cook was not a gardener, we'd never know about this. And my guess is the balloon probably blew up over Canada. Okay, how come you guys haven't heard about this? Well, at the end of the war, there was a release of all kind of classified information. And the balloon was listed in it, but most of the newspaper articles were just a couple paragraphs. I was really lucky because when I started researching this in Fort Collins, Colorado, the local newspaper had a darn long story, very detailed. And I've never found a story that was that had much information to it. Okay. And another reason was that there were very few casualties. And we developed much more sophisticated balloons to spy on the Soviet Union. And, oh, hey, maybe we can drop some stuff that'll kill all their food. They're common dogs. Who cares about that? Fortunately, calmer minds prevailed. Another deal is that they were launching balloons near Roswell, New Mexico at the time of the flying saucer thing. And I think that was a cover story. But I'm not going to get into any of the flying saucer. All right, recently, are balloons still a weapon of war? Well, after the Americans took over Kabul in one of the Al-Qaeda places, they saw on a whiteboard a balloon. But more recently, in Gaza, the Hamas group is sending party balloons over Israel. That started some fires. I mean, it just looks perfectly bizarre on that. And, you know, Israel is a dry country. Okay, wrapping up is the Peace Crane Project. Professor Jeff Takashita of the U of Michigan, he had been put in a so-called relocation camp out west. He found out that the camp he was in was close to the site in Oregon where the kids and the lady were killed. And he started doing some digging, and he still had family in Japan. And he made contact with the women who worked on the balloon construction. And they went, they felt pretty bad about it. They made these peace cranes. They took these to Bly, Oregon, and met with the people in the town. still a close connection. Of course, these women are getting up there. Okay, that's the end of it. Questions? Yes, sir. Okay, that's fine. Sir. Okay. This was in March. Balloons were sighted over the snowy range in Wyoming. I don't know if you've ever been to that part or not. I forget what national forest it is, but the thing about the snowy range, it's well named. They still have the big poles marking the highway, even up in the summertime. They never take it down. So people saw it over the snowy range, and then it came over Fort Collins right around sunset, and a lot of people saw it. It went over the town, and then people are watching it, and they see something go under off of it, and it looks like it explodes. Now, at the farm, a farmer and one of his kids, they were working in the machine shop. They heard this big explosion. They go out. They see this big fireball on the ground, and it's squirting out fire to set other fires. And people come out from Fort Collins. And like I said, somebody tried to do a remote radio broadcast, and he got cut off. So next day, the Army and FBI came, and they took pictures and looked at it. And then a couple days later, the farmer's in his field in his tractor, and his tractor is swallowed up in a hole. The high explosive bomb went through the field, which apparently had been plowed, and exploded underground and created a little cavern. So that's the story of the Fort Collins balloon. There's the I-25 goes right by there. And I keep telling the Colorado Highway Department they should have a little thing at the rest stop right there. I think it gives the information. Well, they just did some computations. They had, how many balloons did I say they had on that? And they thought that that would be enough, after they had kind of an average time it would take for the balloon to kind of yo-yo up and down. It was just a computation. Yeah. I mean, these are not accurate weapons. Now, a few years back, I was at the Canadian Defense Research Establishment outside of Medicine Hat, Alberta. Not the mountainous part, it's the ugly part that looks like Wyoming. But I gave a talk about that, and these are all researchers. And I said, well, will this help you in your current work, or is it just a matter of historical curiosity? And the top dog there gets up, oh yes, historical curiosity. Well, later when I'm in their offices, they're going, yeah, this would be a royal pain to investigate and try to do. Because, the Israelis are finding out right now. If they send these balloons off at dark, of course, you really got to watch where the wind's blowing, because they could go black on that. Now, the Brits, they used balloons to drop propaganda sheets and incendiaries over Germany, and some of them carried cables to try to short-circuit the power lines. And some of those balloons landed in Sweden. So it's not the most effective weapon in the world. Yes?
For the women and children, were they killed by
No, there was a bomb that was on the ground. The kids saw the envelope. They go, what's this? They start pulling it, and here's the bad irony. There were Forest Service people in this trailhead. And they're and kids don't do it, and then boom. Now, the real interesting thing is Japanese bombs were considered to be not as safety-proof as the German and the Allied ones. But on the other hand is that, when you drop a bomb, that's when it arms itself. For a high explosive bomb, there's a little propeller, and that arms the bomb. And I assume there's something similar for an incendiary. But it was a high explosive that killed the kids. So they think an incendiary also might have gone off on that. It was just a really sad thing. Just shattered the. Yes, sir.
What do they think, what was the principle for when they were supposed to go off, how that's supposed to work?
Well, when all the sandbags were dropped, then the bombs would drop. Because it was the same.
Strike something in order to go off?
Yes, it should, but about a year ago, somebody in the middle of nowhere in the forest of British Columbia found a bomb, high explosive, that was buried up to its tail fins. So sometimes they go off, sometimes they don't. They were pretty finicky, the Japanese bombs. The explosive ordnance people really didn't like to work on it. But hey, you're in the Pacific, you don't have a choice. I think there was somebody back there. Yes. Yeah. You wanted me to talk more about the actual balloon? Or what? I'm sorry.
No, my grandkids should be a source for you.
Oh, okay. Sure. That'd be great. The one time I took a balloon course, we were supposed to go up on a Saturday in Colorado. 3 straight Saturdays, the winds were too strong. The 4th Saturday, I just left then and missed it. Yes, ma'am. April of 42 to November of 45, so it's about 2.5 years roughly on that. Somebody over here? Yeah.
All these systems are analog.
Right.
Systems. What could happen? What could have been done if they had this kind of digital electronics?
I think it would still be hit or miss. Because to guide a balloon, a circular sphere is not the most accurate way of trying to guide a balloon. I mean, you need it shaped like a blimp or the Hindenburg on that. As a terror weapon, I think there's other, we've seen in the Ukraine, there's all kind of terror stuff. So, I don't think, today's technology now, who gets Discovery Plus streaming service? I'm in a documentary that just came out a couple months ago. It's still up. I don't think they'll ever take it down. I think the Great Japanese Balloon Invasion, something like that. And, Discovery likes to do everything is that they kind of recreated the balloon dropping thing within a big building. And, they showed how the thing worked and everything, and then they went out to a firing range and exploded a bomb that was similar. But, I wouldn't spend all that effort to it. The technology, it would probably work a little better. The battery probably wouldn't freeze up. But, to me, it's a dead-end technology. Unlike bicycling in the armed forces, I'm going to talk about that in Indianapolis in July. I think it's dead-end technology. Yes. Yes. in the handout. Yeah, Becca, how many did you make? 30, okay. Let's see here. Okay, there's a DVD called On Paper Wings. That covers actually what took place there. And also on this, it has the Discovery documentary. Yeah. And also the Smithsonian Institution Press book, they talk about that a little bit, which I have. You can get this off of Amazon. Okay. A large, let me get. Okay, a large floor area was required for the shaping and final assembly room. All protrusions, not only on the floor but around the walls, were carefully wrapped with paper to protect the balloon skin from damage. It was difficult to detect skin abrasions once the balloon was assembled. That's the abrasions on the envelope, not on the girl. Girls that were making the balloons were instructed not to wear hairpins, to have closely trimmed fingernails, to wear socks even in the midsummer heat, and to use gloves despite the fact that their work required manual dexterity. Yeah, that's what this one has about the girls. There's some other articles and whatnot in it. So, okay, any more questions? Yes.
Is there any estimate or,
Right. In one of the books they do. Right. I don't know if the Smithsonian book has it. I've never written it down. The thing of it is, cost is, are you going to assume, okay, just the cost of making the balloon? That's pretty set in standard, but okay, the cost to the Americans. Well, the government officials, they were doing that as part of their normal duties on that. Okay, you did shut down the Hanford plant. Well, that stuff, it's not classified, but the Atomic Energy Agency, they released thousands of documents with no good way of getting into that. Their search engine is lousy. It makes Facebook's search engine look like, top of the line. It's just lousy. I mean, it's like hiding in the right place. So, how do you factor in this stuff about how much it costs versus anything? I mean, you did tell. Well, the biggest cost, I didn't put this, is that for interceptions, this is a bit of a cost, is that pilots in training on the West Coast were ordered to sit on airfields to be scrambled against a balloon sighting. And I did talk to one who was an MSU prof. He said, yeah, it's just boring. But, they couldn't train for the invasion of Japan. So that would be a cost, but it's hard doing the money because, the planes are there. It's not, that they developed a special balloon interceptor or anything. It was on the backs of the agencies. And the Canadians, they did it even worse. For the forest fires, they just said that's a provincial responsibility. The national government's not going to do anything. So, yeah. Yes. About 3 to 4. You want me to check this real quick? It goes, yeah. Yeah, it's about 3. Boy. I don't, well, they made it in, I think, under 6 months. And they made enough pieces of paper for 10,000 balloons. I think they had a pretty good production on that. But, yeah, I would have to go back and see that. Yeah. Okay, somebody over here? Okay. Once, twice, thrice. I think that's it. Oh, yeah.
Actually, what I was more curious about was what the manufacturing cost of the balloons actually became.
Somebody has tallied that up, but I forget which book I found it in on that. I've got about 6 banker's boxes of documents and whatnot on that. I got money from the Canadian government to go to Canada and research that. So, their tax dollars at work, and I gave talks in Canada. So, yeah. Okay, well, thanks for coming out. Tell Bambi not to jump in front of my car on 96.
Michael, thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. You're welcome.
All right. Okay, well, thanks everybody for coming out tonight. We have outstanding presentations like this at the first Wednesday of every month. Our next one, May 4th, we will welcome Mr. Joe Boggs, who will speak to us about Prohibition's Proving Grounds, also known as Rum Running in the Sky. There is a flyer just outside the door that'll tell you a little more about that. He's also going to do a book signing on this subject, so that should be quite informative and interesting. Please remember the donation boxes we have in here and just outside the door. They are hungry. We truly appreciate your support, and the support does go a long way to keep these programs going. Thank you to Becca Folsom for putting them together. Great job, Becca. And again, thank you all for coming out tonight, and until next time, bye-bye and bye-bye, and see ya.